Hello, I'm Timothy Perfect from Proxdine, and last week I ordered up a AWS IoT button, and so I wanted to share kind of my findings with it. We used a lot of the Amazon web services and infrastructure for our IoT type devices, and I wanted to share kind of my thoughts on this and how it all works and ties in. Amazon has been selling these types of buttons as dash buttons, where you can press the button and it'll automatically order your detergent or some other type of product in your house, easily be able to reorder them. And they're Wi-Fi buttons, which is kind of interesting because usually you don't see a lot of Wi-Fi buttons. And digging into it, you can see that the AWS IoT doesn't use HTTP, it uses MQTT, which is another kind of interesting thing. And so I decided to order one up. It was $20 on Amazon. The dash buttons are $5, but I assume that's because the product is subsidizes them. But the buttons themselves are $20. They're not really something you can deploy, and you'll see that as we kind of look at all the different pieces. The first thing physically, you can see that it's it has a little bit of AWS IoT branding on it, and it's got a nice big button here and an LED. They are thicker than I kind of expected. I thought that they would be really thin devices, given that they were going to be mounted up on something. But I think it's because I only saw the marketing that was like right shot from the front. But they are a bit thicker. You can see that this is our series 350. It's not that much. It's not that much bigger, and it does have removable batteries for our series 350 that has similar functionalities, though that is Bluetooth. This has the battery is a single AAA battery that's soldered onto the motherboard, and it's good for 1,000 presses, which will last about 3 years if you press it once a day. If you're doing it much more than that, like you're using it to maybe turn lights on and off, you would get significantly less usage out of it. But this is really just kind of a prototype proof of concept button to see how it can tie in through an IoT button. So a lot of interesting pieces to this. So before I jump in and get started on kind of the internals, let me show you how it works. So if you press the button, first thing it does, it flashes white, which means it's connecting up to the Wi-Fi network. And then it'll turn green once it's connected, and it'll call a web API that turns the carrots, my internet-enabled carrots here, ears around. So it's just simply a web call. And note that this does not call that directly. It can't do webhooks, but it does use what's called MQTT, which is a lightweight version, or it's a lightweight protocol used in Internet of Things to be able to send very small messages over unreliable connections. And so it goes up to Amazon services, and that triggers a web call, which actually comes back down to our network. So it goes up to the cloud and then comes back down to our network and calls the web API on my carrots, which then makes the ears turn. So let me show you how I got this configured. The first thing, let's unconfigure it. So if you press and hold for 5 seconds, you'll see that it flashes. It's saying that it's ready to be configured. So you can see it's flashing blue. And now if we go over and look at my computer, you can see I have a new wireless network called Button Configure Me 49B. So I'll select that. And this has an embedded web server in it to allow you to do configuration. So if I go to 192.168.0.1, it'll have the configuration. And you can see it keeps the old configuration, allows you to update it. It does browse your SSIDs that are around, and as you can see that I already did Europa 2.4 gigahertz, and notice it doesn't show my 5 gigahertz networks, which means that this is limited only 2.4 gigahertz, and my network is WPA2, so I assume that it supports at least WPA2, as well as open networks. We're not going to add a password in. The way AWS IoT service works on Amazon's AWS is you have to have an identity, a certificate plus a private key, to be able to authenticate a thing to this service. And so once you go to the dashboard, it generates those for you. So if we go in here, you can see that I have a certificate and a private key. So if I look at these, you can see that I have this AWS certificates issued for this button. So if I select that, and then I go over to the private key, and I'll select that, And then the endpoint and the region are both set up inside the AWS IoT. It's assigned for you. You don't choose those, and so they're basically just copy and pasted from there, and that generates this final endpoint. So I'll agree to the terms and conditions, and I'll hit configure. And you can see that the light will flash for a bit, and then that configuration network, the button Wi-Fi network, will disappear, and I'll switch back over to my standard Wi-Fi network. And the button's now configured. And it looks like it pushed it because my rabbit's ears are moving. And we'll go back and look at my Wi-Fi is now back to Europa, which is our standard network. And we're ready to kind of look at what's happening kind of behind the scenes on AWS IoT. So I've already logged into AWS, and I've done a search on our resources in AWS IoT. And you can see I have 3 different resources. The first one is the actual representation of the thing. It's actually what's called the shadow image, but that's not really important for this. But this is it's an actual object that represents the thing, which is this button in AWS. You can see that this has a link certificate. So those are the certificates that I allowed to authenticate. The certificate is on the AWS side to verify that this is the actual thing that's authenticating. You can see that it has a little handshake down here, which means certificate, and so that's associated with that thing. And then the second second resource is a policy. And this is what resources AWS, or I'm sorry, this thing is allowed to access. And you can see that it's allowed to have the resource, which is this policy ARN, which is the endpoint that it talks to. And finally, it has an action that's associated with it. And this is where it gets interesting. So this first thing is, it says, this first piece is, it's a thing in the system. It has to have that. It has a certificate, so it authenticates. So it's now on there. And then the policy says, what can it access? And then it says, okay, and access the AWS IoT service. And then it has an action, which is a Lambda, which means that once this button is pressed, it can call a Lambda function. And if you're not familiar with AWS Lambda, it's just a snippet of code that automatically runs on demand. And so we've hooked it up so when you press this button, it'll automatically run a snippet of code. And so let's look at that. So this is all set up. So when I press this button, it'll authenticate correctly and have access to the correct resources, and then it'll run this Lambda function. So I'll go over to, let me show you where it's actually selected. You can see the Lambda action here, and here's the function. Here's edit actions. And you can see that it has I have three different Lambda functions: IoT incoming rule, SQL RDS test, and IoT button function. And you can see in this Lambda section of AWS IoT, if I go to the dashboard, if I go to the functions, you'll see that I have those same 3 functions. And the one that, so a couple of these were set up for me. This is the one I actually created to be on the button. And it's called IoT button function. And this is a very simple script. And it's written in node.js. It supports, let me see the different languages. It supports Java 8, Node.js, node.js 4.3, and Python. So I just did it in Node.js. And all it does is the handler that gets called is called exports handler, and that's chosen by the action when you press the button, what Lambda function is called, as well as what handler is called. And all it does is it calls 2 URLs, and this is where it calls this host name, which is my IP address here, and port 9004, because I'm forwarding on my home network over to my rabbits. And then it calls this to put the ears in a random position. I also, which I'm not really showing this, I do call another URL that sends a push notification to my phone. And so when that push comes, so I press the button, the ears move, and I get a push notification, which is great. So it allows me to push the button and have it kind of happen all behind the scenes. So you can see that if we go to the dashboard, you can see that it does show the different invocations I've done and how long it took to run each one of these. So we'll go ahead and press the button, and you can see it flashes. It takes about 4 to 5 seconds, and then when it's completed, it it authenticates. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens, right? So this, I've actually looked on the network, and this comes up, it finds the SSID, it joins, it does a DHCP request to get the IP address. Then it has to authenticate using public key cryptography to AWS, and then it has to post an event to an MQTT endpoint. And then when that happens, a Lambda function is spun up, and what that does, it just calls two URLs, one that's generates a push notification, the other one that turns the rabbit's ears. So you can see the majority of time is just associating with the Wi-Fi network and getting an IP address. So if you press this and watch, you can see that it's flashing white. As soon as it gets green, it attaches to the network, and almost instantaneously the ears move. So really, the kind of what this is demonstrating is it does take a while to associate it with a Wi-Fi network and be able to do that kind of handshake to be able to get everything correct before it can actually call them. So that's the Amazon AWS IoT button. Thanks for watching, and please leave any comments below, or subscribe, or visit us at prox9.com for more information. Thanks.